Mona Magistus, also known as Meg.
Hello.
A hydro-elemental character that can set up illusions to taunt, trap and eliminate most enemies with her high damage dealing talents. As one of the characters whose element belongs to the primary element triangle Hydro, Viro and Cryo, she has access to executing the specific elemental reaction Vaporize. But before we delve into the advanced stuff that we can do with Mona, let's start with the basics first. Mona is one of the characters that use a catalyst as her weapon, which means that she attacks from range and deals elemental damage instead of physical. This gives her an advantage of gaining access to elemental attacks compared to most characters who use physical weapons. As a catalyst user, she can deal a high amount of damage by executing most elemental reactions, especially to enemies already infused with another element different to hers, often eliminating the hassle of switching to another character with a different element to set up an element infusion to the enemy. But you must also take note that Mona possesses a catalyst as her weapon, means she has no access to dealing physical damage to her enemies, unless you're using the Eye of Perception. Some situations will render her useless against certain enemies such as the Hydro and Cryo Abyss mages when their shields are up. Even with that, she is still convenient to have around when the shields of those mages got broken. Now moving on to her talents. Compared to most characters who have 6 talents overall, Mona has 7 talents. Her 7 talents are Ripple of Fate, Mirror Reflection of Doom, Stellaris Phantasm, Illusory Torrent, Come and Get Me Hag, Waterborne Destiny and Principium of Astrology. Ripple of Fate is her normal attack.
Yes, sir.
She performs up to 4 water splash attacks that deal hydro damage. Its attack speed is medium, and she can pretty much infuse her enemies with hydro in time. With her charged attack, she consumes stamina to deal an AoE hydro damage after a short casting time, or after spinning twice. Her charged attack, in my experience, is one of her bread and butter in her arsenal, and with just her charged attack alone, she can deal a large amount of damage, provided you have set up the proper element infusions to her enemies. Plunging attack, well, this does not really matter that much, since you barely have any chance to do a plunging attack in this game anyway, unless they give all characters a way to double jump or a gadget that enables you to do that. Reflection of Doom is her elemental skill. Creates an illusory phantom of fate from coalesced water spouts.
Yes.
The phantom actively taunts nearby enemies to it. Each second of its duration it deals hydro damage to them, and explodes when its duration expires, dealing a bit larger hydro damage. One of her convenient tools in combat is this gives her, or your other party members, to set up other elemental skills or bursts for certain elemental reactions, or whatever plan you have concocted. There are 2 ways to create an illusory phantom with Reflection of Doom. If you just press your elemental skill button, then Mona will create the illusory phantom to the enemy targetable in her range, which is a safe thing to do. Most of the time, you will always press that elemental skill button whenever you are playing as Mona, since I'm pretty sure you will use her Reflection of Doom as an initiator or set things up for your party. But if you ever find yourself in a pickle, got surrounded, or you just wanna gain distance from your enemies, there is another way to use that Reflection of Doom, and that is holding down your elemental skill button. Holding your elemental skill button, Mona then will proceed to utilize the water currents to move backwards swiftly before creating an illusory phantom. Basically her own version of backstep, only that it leaves a dummy for enemies to hit on and get taunted. This comes in handy as it also gives you another way to avoid an incoming enemy attack, especially when you do not have any stamina to dash away or iframe from enemy attacks. Make sure you utilize the 2 ways of using Mona's elemental skill, as this will be a convenient tool to use and gives you a choice for decision making, whether to use the skill as a setup or evade button. On a side note, only one phantom created by Mirror Reflection of Doom can exist at any time.
Really, nigga?
This is a complete bummer. Imagine being able to create 2 phantoms through a Reflection of Doom. Mona won't even need to attack her enemies, and just let her phantoms do all the work. Reap sacrificial fragments. Stellaris Phantasm, a powerful elemental burst Mona casts. She summons the sparkling waves and creates a reflection of the starry sky, applying the illusory bubble status to the opponents in a large AoE. The illusory bubble traps Mona's opponents inside a pocket of destiny and also makes them wet. Renders weaker opponents immobile, which means non-weaker enemies such as the large Illusory Shieldman or Ruin Guard cannot be immobilized by an illusory bubble, but still applies the Omen debuff to them. Immobilizing an enemy with her illusory bubble applies an omen to the opponent, which gives a damage bonus, also increasing the damage of the attack that causes it.
Serious?
The omen does increase the damage taken by your enemies. Should you attack the enemy trapped in an illusory bubble or an enemy struck with an omen debuff, it deal a bonus hydro damage to that enemy regardless whoever attacked. The omen is like a time bomb. Even if you don't actually attack the enemy afflicted with an omen, the omen will explode on the enemy anyway after a certain amount of time. Only that you don't get to deal a bonus damage to that enemy. This happens when you are facing multiple enemies at once, and they are all spread out, and your current party does not have the skills to deal damage in a wide AoE range. But mostly it happens with at least 2 non-weaker enemies and 3 to 4 weaker enemies existing during an encounter. In that situation, you can just use the Stellaris Phantasm or Mona's Elemental Burst to buy your party some time and create more space by trapping weaker enemies to mitigate the annoyance you would get from them, and just solely focus on the non-weaker enemies who are not immobilized or trapped by the illusory bubbles. But then again, the omen does stay for long, that you can attack all enemies afflicted with omen before it expires. You probably have killed the non-weaker enemies after some time and move on to cleaning out the rest of the trash, aka the weaker enemies. You can also use the Stellaris Phantasm just to see an helpless enemy trapped floating in front of you, and you can just look at them with your condescending Mona to have some bit of a laugh there. Just make sure you do only this when there are only weaker enemies around. Regarding more information about the omen from Mona's Stellaris Phantasm, oftentimes, you had to make a choice on what kind of attack to do to someone who is afflicted with an omen. Obviously, an enemy with an omen is wet or infused with hydro. You would want a pyro character to do the final blow on that enemy by using a pyro attack to execute a vaporize reaction for even more bonus damage. Your vaporize damage done by your pyro character gets a bonus damage because it's an elemental reaction of hydro and pyro. Not to mention the omen also deals another bonus damage in a form of hydro. Added damage bonus depending on what kind of attack you did to the enemy with an omen. Basically you hit the enemy twice with the Stellaris Phantasm. The first hit is from your character who attacked the enemy with an omen and the omen itself exploding on that enemy. You might be confused on how that works, and this is why this video exists. I'm not really saying that you should prioritize the option of having a pyro character to do the elemental reaction for bonus damage, but it is just that with the pyro and hydro element involved, and due to the mechanics of the game inputted in this one, they are the ones that produce a large damage whenever these two are put together. Even with electro and cryo, you could still deal tons of damage with them. With the freedom you are allowed to have in this game, there are many choices you can do and come up with different outcomes depending on what you choose. If you have Mona yourself, I recommend trying it and experimenting with different kinds of attack you can do with Mona's Stellaris Phantasm. In conclusion, Mona's Elemental Burst is used to afflict omen to everybody for bonus damage and trap the weaker enemies. Whether you manually explode the omen on an enemy or leave them hanging to die 5 seconds later is entirely up to you. Illusory Torrent, an alternate sprint used by Mona.
Yes?
Take in mind that this is not exclusive to Mona, as there will be another character who will also have this talent.
Yes.
But for now, only Mona has an alternate sprint as of the current patch. This talent is also the reason why Mona has 7 talents. This does make her fancy. Shall I remind you that this is why she is the best character in the game?
We don't care.
Alternate sprint. Mona cloaks herself within the water's flow, consuming stamina to move rapidly. Basically she transforms into a moving puddle of water and moves faster, while in this form, she is literally wet.
Damn!
When under the effect of Illusory Torrent, Mona can move at high speed on water, which is very nice.
Yes.
I use this talent for so many times now that the Guan Stone Forest is not a pain to traverse with, and I can just easily go to the Geohypostation with more or less hassle. Illusory Torrent also applies the wet status to nearby opponents whenever Mona reappears. Since Mona moves faster when under the effect of Illusory Torrent, you can use this to get close immediately to an enemy and reappear right besides them to easily apply wet status to them, then change to another character with a different element to execute an elemental reaction immediately. With this way, you can save the use of her Reflection of Doom and Stellaris Phantasm for later, when you have another setup in mind during combat encounters. Or you could just normal attack once to apply wet status to an enemy in range, which is easy since you save stamina, but remember, at least you have many options. Next, the come and get me hand. Her first unlockable passive talent, after ascending her once. This talent coincides with her Illusory Torrent.
Nice.
After she has used Illusory Torrent for 2 seconds, if there are any opponents nearby, Mona will automatically create a phantom. To make it clearer on how to use this one, as long as you are sprinting with Mona, or she is under the effect of Illusory Torrent and you are in combat, she will keep dropping phantoms or reflections of doom in place. You can use this, especially when her elemental skill is on cooldown, to taunt enemies for a short time as they stay for 2 seconds. Might come in handy when you are trying to avoid an attack at the last second, and gives you a reason to just keep sprinting away as much as you like. Just remember that your stamina is not infinite. Do not worry though. Phantoms created this way still deal at least half the damage the reflections of doom do, depending on the level of Mona's elemental skill. With this talent, you can just use food items, Barbara's elemental skill, and Razor's passive utility talent, or other characters who have it, as long as you are in Teyvat open world, to reduce the stamina consumption of your sprinting, and just keep sprinting around an enemy leaving reflections of doom, to deal damage to your enemy to have a merry-go-round. She can just basically spin to win with her passive talent. Isn't that just amazing? Now moving on to her second passive talent, Waterborne Destiny, unlocks at her 4th ascension. Increases Mona's hydro damage bonus by a degree equivalent to 20% of her energy recharge rate. With this unique stat boosting passive talent of hers, gives you all the more reason to invest on her energy recharge stat or not avoid them during the growth of her artifacts.
What the hell?
With more energy recharge, means her elemental burst will be available most of the time during combat, and who knows, you can get her to cast her elemental burst at least twice or thrice in the same encounter. As her energy recharge rate rises up, additional hydro damage bonus is also given to her. A bonus elemental damage stat is always welcome, especially for characters who use a catalyst or rely heavily on elemental attacks. That is why on her Sansa artifact, I recommend having an energy recharge rate as its main stat, unless you wanna use other main stat instead. And last but not the least, her passive utility talent, Principium of Astrology. When Mona crafts weapon ascension materials, she has a 25% chance to refund 1 count of 1 material out of all the crafting materials used.
That's pretty good.
Let me tell you that Mona is my first 5-star character I ever gotten in this game, and it was such a smooth sailing upgrading my party's weapons back when I was just starting out. Oftentimes, I would save up 20 resins or 40. Luckily, if I ever got 1 refund weapon ascension material to further enhance or ascend the weapon I was currently upgrading at the time. And I do not have to do the same domain just to get 1 measly weapon ascension material. I must admit though, in the end game of Genshin Impact, or if you are at least adventurer rank 50 or higher, this passive utility talent of hers will become useless at this point, since you probably have your weapons already and enhanced them to their maximum levels. Nevertheless, if you are just starting out in this game and somehow got Mona as one of your first few 5-star characters to have, consider yourself lucky, as she have this useful passive utility talent which will come in handy most of the time, even with that 25% chance. A chance to get a bonus or refund 1 weapon ascension material. It still counts, do not underestimate it. Now that we covered all of Mona's talents, you must have already a sufficient amount of information to go by on how Mona works. Hopefully the information will help and give you an idea on how to effectively play as her. Whether inside or outside of combat, Mona is a very useful and creative character to have, as she gives you tons of options to choose on how to approach your situations wisely. As someone who has Mona on party almost all the time, you are not going to regret having Mona around. As of giving the finishing touches of this video, I will share to you my recommended weapon and artifacts to use for her, as they have been with my Mona for a longest amount of time I have ever played this game. Bear in mind though, I have not yet recently changed any of this weapon and artifacts, so it may turn out to be outdated or obsolete probably to you, but in my opinion, they still hold up for me, so I have no reason to change them yet. With the Catalyst as her type of weapon, I recommend the Widsith as this gives her bonus critical damage stat, and whenever you switch to Mona with this weapon, it will give her a random buff that may be an attack, elemental damage or elemental mastery buff that lasts for 10 seconds. The random buff has a cooldown of 30 seconds, so take note of it. You can control actually when to trigger the buff, especially if you are playing as her. Basically before any encounter starts, you would want to start with her first, as surely you are gonna use her elemental skill or Reflection of Doom to initiate the fight first. You would not want to trigger the weapon's passive to Mona, just for an additional damage bonus to her elemental skill. You would want to reserve that for her elemental burst or Stellaris Phantasm. So make sure you are first switched into Mona before a fight starts without the Widsith's passive on cooldown and ready to be triggered at any time you switched back to her from using another character. Basically, try to always start and end the fight with her switched in, if you are gonna use the Widsith as her weapon. To be fair, this Catalyst is pretty much a must-have. Since at Refinement rank 5, this Catalyst is a beast, whether you are a free-to-play or whale player. Lastly, her artifacts. I recommend using the Noblesse Oblige at its maximum potency, which means you must use 4 artifact pieces of Noblesse Oblige to be able to use the set bonuses offered by the artifacts. With the behavior of Mona's gameplay, her primary objective really is to put that omen to your party's enemies immediately, to dish out a large amount of damage at once. As such, the 2-piece set bonus of Noblesse Oblige increases her elemental burst damage by 20%. Very juicy. Combine that with a 4-piece set bonus of Noblesse Oblige. Whenever Mona casts her elemental burst, all party members will get an additional attack boost of 20% for a certain amount of time, which is very handy. Whether you are playing solo or co-op, this artifact set is useful for her, as this just not benefits only Mona herself, but also the other party members. How you wanna disseminate your Noblesse Oblige artifacts is entirely up to you. Just make sure that your Sansa has an energy recharge as its main stat. Hydro damage bonus for her goblet and critical damage for circlet. As for the flower and plume artifacts, I just always follow this criteria of substat to have. First, critical damage, critical rate, energy recharge rate, elemental mastery and attack percent as last. I also use the same criteria for Sans, Goblet, and Circlet. Just take note that getting the desired main stat and substats for your artifacts will not always work for you. Due to the abysmal RNG Genshin impact offers, everyone always have a hard time just getting the right artifacts needed. So if you ever found yourself in a situation where you do not exactly get the required substat growth that you need for your artifacts, stay positive and do not get depressed immediately. There will always be another day of artifacts farming for you with your newly replenished original resins. But seriously, good luck though. Luck is always needed in this game. Let us talk about which characters are good in synergy alongside Mona. I will share it in a form of a party and I will use mine as a reference. This might come off as a pretty basic party setup for you, but for me, it always works most of the time. So what party I have in mind is the Anemo Traveler, or basically you, Mona, Rosaria and Xinan. The gameplay is that always have Mona switched in first to initiate the combat with her elemental skill. After her Reflection of Doom is planted on an enemy or put in place, the nearby enemies to it will be wet. Now we switch to Rosaria to prepare going into the actual combat area and close the gap in distance with her elemental skill Ravaging Confession. Basically use Rosaria's elemental skill as a way to get close immediately to an enemy. Since Rosaria is a cryo-elemental character, both of her elemental skill and burst deals cryo damage. With the Ravaging Confession in her arsenal, Rosaria blinks to the enemy or behind of it. If the enemy is an on-large enemy and deals cryo damage after, this will make the enemy become frozen in place, assuming you hit the same enemy Mona hitted with her Reflection of Doom that made the enemy wet. Unless the auto lock on screws you, which happens about 40% of the time. Honestly, they should include an option where you are allowed to manually lock onto an enemy, as this option will not be considered overpowered or broken anyway and there is no PvP in the game. I mean, we are in year 2021 already. Come on. Back to what I was talking about. Now that we are in a situation you are currently playing as Rosaria and the enemy is frozen in place, Take note that Mona's reflection of doom cast through her elemental skill is still up and will take a few seconds before it expires. Grab this opportunity to switch to the Traveler, or in my case Lumine, and cast her elemental skill Palm Vortex to make a swirl elemental reaction and pull in the other nearby enemies who were not frozen to give also the same debuff or status to them, while also dealing bonus damage. If you are wearing the Iridescent Venerer artifact set on the Traveler or yourself, then even better, since the artifact set increases the Nemo damage bonus by 15%, damage of the swirl elemental reaction by 60% and decreases the enemy's elemental resistance to the element infused in this swirl by 40% for 10 seconds. Now we had the Traveler successfully swirled the cryo to all of the available nearby enemies to freeze them at place. Your enemies are now wounded and most of them are frozen in place. You have a choice whether to switch back to Mona or Aceria, or switch to Zilan to use her elemental skill to execute a vaporize elemental reaction. But for the sake of the video, we are gonna switch back to Mona and cast her elemental burst Stellaris Phantasm. Since most of the enemies are frozen anyway, I might as well put an omen to them to secure my kills and finish them all in one swoop. Then I switched to Zilan to give the finishing blow with her elemental burst and be the perfect rockstar. Voila, conflict resolved. This is just one of the sample synergies you can do with Mona, and I'm pretty sure you can come up with other more creative gameplays you can do with her, or even other characters you can pair her up with in the future. That about sums it up, my guide or opinion on how to play as Mona anyway. You might be wondering that I did not cover Mona's constellations throughout the course of this video. My reason is that the constellation or this specific feature of the game is just considered an add-ons for me. And to be perfectly honest, in an unrealistic setup, one should not really need a constellation for a character to be effective or working properly. Especially if you are a free-to-play Genshin Impact or in general, a gacha player. Just getting the character should be enough for one to play as. But if requiring points in Constellation, or must have add-ons, just for a character to work, is never good. Or in general, requiring add-ons 24/7 is never good. Please remember that. As a free-to-play Genshin Impact player myself, do not worry having no points in Mona's constellation. I know I have 1 point in her constellation, but I just got really lucky anyway and that's it. As her base talent kit is already enough and sufficient to play as her effectively, and you can do a lot of stuff with her. If you ever come this far in this video, I appreciate you taking the time to watch through all of it, and if you want to ask a question regarding more about Mona's gameplay, feel free to ask at the comments section and I will try my best to answer. If you want other more guides, or how to insert character here, let me know, and let us see if I can work on that after, and create more related videos in the future. Thanks and see you later.